When you talk about underappreciated games, one that always comes to mind for me is Prey, a first-person shooter released back in 2006 that has the distinction of being one of the few titles to ever use the id Tech 4 engine. Developed by Human Head Studios, it's a game with an interesting pre- and post-development saga, involving none other than 3D Realms and eventually Bethesda. It originally started out as a game being worked on by 3D Realms as far back as 1995, and there's a whole heap of screenshots from the early builds of the game which are honestly pretty interesting, and give a bit of insight into something that ultimately never came to be. The saddest part about looking at these is the realization that in an alternate universe somewhere, this version of the game got released, along with the 2001 build for Duke Nukem Forever. Anyway, Human Head Studios took over after 3D Realms had trouble delivering. Yeah, where have we heard that one before? With half of their team split between working on Prey and also Dead Man's Hand, a fun little western first-person shooter that about only 4 people played, myself included. And one that I even did a video on back when I used a microphone that sounded like it was made out of a toilet bowl.
Dead Man's Hand is a first-person shooter game set in the Wild West.
Prey eventually turned into what was finally released in 2006, and there were 2 themes that they kept throughout most of the development cycle. First off, the inclusion of a Native American protagonist, something that hasn't really been done all that often since.
I don't have time for this.
And secondly, the use of portals as a main navigation mechanic, something that would eventually feature prominently in the final build of the game. Also worth noting is that they also beat Portal to the punch, and arguably did it as good if not better at times. Prey even has individual areas you could be teleported to that are almost like mini biomes with their own center of gravity. It's really awesome stuff.
That was fucked up.
You see, Sonny Jim, there's 2 kinds of people in this world, right? There's those who think that Prey is a great game, and then there's those who are wrong. So on the off chance you haven't played this thing, well, hopefully in the next 15 minutes I can motivate you to do so. Also, you're not having deja vu. Yes, I did a video on this thing a few years back, but it's been a while since I played it, and if this video serves no other purpose than just making other people aware of it, well then I'd consider that a success.
I have something to show you.
Right, so before you even get into the game all that much, the first and most impressive thing to note is that it starts off with the protagonist looking at himself in a mirror. Working mirrors in video games nowadays being a sight for sore eyes. The story is that you're playing as a dude named Tommy, or Damasi as he's called by his grandfather Anisi.
What are you talking about, Anisi?
Recently out of the army, Tommy returns to the reservation he grew up on, living with his grandfather and his girlfriend Jen.
I hate this place. It's a goddamn cage.
Seems Tommy's got some unresolved issues though, including some pretty bad pent-up rage. And after committing what's basically attempted murder with a wrench, Tommy, Jen, and Anisi are all abducted by aliens in what is easily one of the best alien abduction scenes in any video game. All set to the tune of Blue Oyster Cult's Fear the Reaper, a song so catchy that most people probably don't listen to the lyrics, but they should. After that, all 3 of them awaken on a ship and discover that Earth is under attack by aliens, and you're trapped inside some kind of organic alien structure called the Sphere, which is a living organism that serves to turn humans into a food source. At one point, they even refer to Tommy as a rogue protein. In your journey to rescue Jen, you'll eventually make your way to the top of this thing and deal with the entity that controls it in a pretty sweet scene that has some really big revelations behind the history of how this all came into existence.
How little you understand.
During that obligatory conveyor belt scene when you've just been abducted, I mean, even at that point you realise that this is a serious and tangible threat, where the entire fate of the world is at stake, even though all Tommy really seems to care about is rescuing Jen and just getting the hell out of there.
Where the hell are we? What's going on?
It marks the beginning of a pretty good character arc that he gets throughout the campaign.
How little you understand.
You see, Prey takes its story pretty seriously, and it ends up being a very dark and twisted journey, but without really coming across as feeling edgy. Within the first hour or so of the game, you'll witness innocent people getting brutally killed, even little kids. I don't know how they got away with showing the visual of a little kid being impaled on a metal spike, but hey, there it is. And you even get to take on their spooky demonic spirits at a few points too, you know, just in case the premise of being abducted into a human meat packing plant wasn't nightmare-inducing enough. There's some traumatic moments later in the campaign too, dealing with the fates of some of the key characters. Let's just say that not everyone is walking away from this, and it does help to make you want to kick even more ass. Part of what I think makes Tommy such a likeable guy, and also what makes the dialogue so great in the game, is that a lot of the stuff he says and does is reactionary. It never seems to feel scripted or forced. I mean, whenever Tommy says something, it's always in response to whatever shit he happens to be dealing with at that particular moment. Like seeing some kind of freaky looking alien for the first time,
Oh, whoa, fucking hell!
or just one of the many times he gets pissed off at something. And let me tell you, this guy sure gets pissed off a lot.
Go to hell, you bastard!
When you defeat that first boss, it might be the most amped up I think I've ever heard a protagonist in a video game. It almost kind of mirrors what we're thinking while playing, and the fact that he's really just an average dude stuck in this messed up situation, I think makes him seem much more relatable. And I think I said it already in my old video, but it's one of the few times where profanity is used correctly.
I said fuck off, Keeper!
Keeper?
Another thing that seems to elevate the stature this game has is the music, which really does sound like something out of a big budget film. This was composed by none other than Jeremy Soule, who worked on a bunch of the Elder Scrolls games before getting the chop from Bethesda. Which is kind of interesting to note, as Bethesda would eventually take over the sequel in the years to come. Either way though, Jeremy does a great job here, and the soundtrack is a definite highlight.
Where in the hell am I?
When it comes to the level design, Prey has that sort of Half-Life vibe to it where it feels more like you're moving through an environment naturally than just doing random levels one after the other. A big component of the gameplay is the portal mechanic, where you can move through all of these portals and end up in entirely different rooms. Sometimes you'll come out of a portal and the gravity will have shifted entirely, with you now being able to look down and see the area you've just come from. Yeah, hope you don't get motion sickness. Another part of that is the walking pads, which kinda snap you in place and let you walk up and over any surface, often being attacked by enemies from other vantage points. This has some really cool integrations during combat, like shoot someone on a walking pad and if they're upside down, you'll see their corpse succumb to gravity and tumble to the ground, which just looks gnarly. You can shoot panels on the walls at times to change the orientation of a room entirely. Can't even imagine where the level designers would have to start when even trying to create something like this.
I think I'm gonna be sick.
It also shows off a high level of interactivity, with the player being able to control all of this stuff themselves. Even something as simple as being able to play the poker and the coin slot machines in Jen's bar and buggering around with the jukebox at the start of the game. Now, I know people might be saying that we need a remaster for this, but the fact of the matter is that it doesn't really need it. And I think even for a 2006 game, this thing looks really good, even if it does have that easily recognizable id Tech 4 engine shine to it. The only games we'd had on the id Tech 4 engine before this was Doom 3 and its expansion pack, along with Quake 4, and while all three of those games looked very similar, I'd say that Prey is just in a league of its own. It looks at its worst though when it's trying to replicate humans, like the character models for Jen and Tommy, but the modelling for a lot of the aliens and the other creatures you come up against shows off some gruesome and appealing body horror moments. Not to mention the environments and the artistic textures and skyboxes, like a lot of that stuff still holds up. Also, it's a well-known fact amongst Chad gamers that dynamic lighting engines like this make for the best looking shooters, and if you disagree, well, then you're dead to me. I just honestly don't think we've ever had this kind of combination of environmental interaction combined with such creative level design ever since. The interactive elements kind of mirrors what you can pull off in immersive sims, playing with security systems and moving around structures in the environments, but the gravity-defying level design is something that's still so innovative. Speaking of innovation, you've got the mechanic of Tommy's spirit powers. You see, it turns out that Tommy's got some latent magical ability where he's able to astral project with a goddamn spirit bow and access areas his body can't. Like, for instance, the locker room at a women's beach volleyball club.
This is definitely weird, but it could come in handy.
As well as all of these high security areas on the sphere. Sometimes there might be an unpassable gap between two ledges, but change into that good old spirit mode, and you can just sashay across some kind of ethereal platform like your Indiana Jones crossing the path of God in The Last Crusade. You can move through force fields, activate and ride lifts, and even grab ammo pickups. Plus you get to listen to some sweet tribal music when you're in this mode too. There were some pretty awesome ideas for this mechanic that apparently got cut too. Originally they wanted to include spirit spaceships that Tommy could get in and fly around. They even toyed around with the idea of having Tommy hunting spirit elk, which is pretty wild. But I mean, in a game where you're an astral projecting Cherokee warrior moving through a spaceship with butthole doors, this doesn't sound as far out as you might think. Oh yeah, I did say that the sphere is supposed to be organic and you'll be moving through these grotesque areas designed to, I guess, appear like an intestinal and digestive system. Gotta say though, it kinda takes a bit of the luster out of space travel.
I think I'm gonna be sick.
The spirit mode also factors into how death works, or doesn't work. For some reason, Tommy seems to be pretty much unkillable. He's kinda like a foul-mouthed version of Jack Harkness from Torchwood. So instead, what happens is when you're killed and lose all of your health points, you instead get transported to the spirit world and have to defeat the dishonored dead with your spirit bow. Yeah, the dishonored dead, those people who say that Quake 2 is a bad game. Play Doom on Hurt Me Plenty or complain about the flashlight in Doom 3.
Dangerously sick people!
This is a minigame where you shoot what kinda looks like flying stingrays to fill up both your health and your spirit energy until you respawn close to the point where you were killed. In essence though, it means you can't ever really die because every time you lose all of your health, you just gotta shoot a bunch of ghost stingrays and then you can just come right back, none the worse for wear. With the enemies probably scratching their heads and wondering what the hell happened. I mean, it's not the toughest game ever made, but you can expect to be thrown into this a fair bit, especially later in the campaign when you come up against some of the stronger enemies. Also seems like a way to justify some of the more powerful attacks these guys have, and there's a few instances where it's going to seem like you've been killed before you even saw it coming. But I mean, I guess if nothing else, it does prevent save scumming. But I mean, even with this mechanic, I'm still beating the shit out of my F5 button like it owes me money.
Real tough guy.
Now, I've always looked at Prey as being a real quality over quantity kind of game. This isn't a game that goes on for 15 hours, it has a campaign that feels tightly structured and doesn't overstay its welcome. It only has 7 weapons, but almost all of these serve a purpose at numerous times throughout the campaign. There ain't all that many enemies either, but they're all easy to identify and assess, which is kind of important. Aside from those weird looking spider things that come out of what looks like literal vagina walls and floor panels. Yeah, butthole doors and vagina walls. Kinda sounds like an evening spent with your mum.
Schwacked.
Let's talk about the weapons too, because again, this is another really unique aspect. So you start off with a wrench, which you'll only use a handful of times before you get to your first weapon, the rifle, which, like every other gun in the game, looks like a living organism that just also happens to serve the purpose of being able to kill stuff. And it's basically just an assault rifle with the bonus of having a scoped sniper mode. After that, you've got the Leech Gun, which, true to its namesake, can leech energy sources, which then affects the weapon's firing mode.
Alright, this'll rock some shit.
The basic one is a fast-firing plasma ball that does pretty good damage and has a high ammo capacity. After that, you've got the Blue Energy, which is able to turn enemies into bump map dice sculptures. All they missed out on here was having some kind of option for Tommy to be able to kick and shatter these things when they're frozen. Along with him then dropping some kind of cheesy one-liner, like, I don't know, he could say, igloo yourself back together. Or how about, I gave that guy the cold shoulder.
Nice to see you.
The last two are the best though. Now, one of these is White Energy, which turns the weapon into basically a lightning slash railgun. Just with the downside of burning through ammo faster than Mountain Dew disappears at a speedrunning convention. Before finally Orange Energy, a constant beam that pretty much vaporizes everything it touches. During one of the earliest boss fights, you'll rip off that creature's arm and use it as a weapon for the rest of the campaign, and this thing is kinda like a machine gun slash grenade launcher combo. And if there's a more reliable combination in a shooting game of a machine gun with a grenade firing alternate fire mode, well, I've yet to see it. And the only combination in life that beats a machine gun and a grenade launcher is brunettes and glasses. But the best weapon by far, I think, is the acid launcher.
Oh yeah, this'll do some damage.
This thing is pretty much just a shotgun that kinda looks like it's spraying out the predator's blood. And nothing screams Native American vengeance like hitting someone in the face with a goddamn burst of acid. And of course, if there wasn't some kind of grenade and rocket launcher, well, it wouldn't be an FPS, would it? And don't worry, they've got that covered too. It's just instead of grenades, you're now throwing these little alien leeches. And later on, you can weaponize these guys even more and shoot them from a launcher. These are all creative visually, and they're all really fun to use during combat, aside from when you're up against some of the more questionably spongy enemies later in the game. Part of what makes Prey's campaign so good, I think, is that it never really has a dull moment. You're always moving onward to the next thing and constantly facing new challenges. At one point, you're talking to an entire race of beings that have somehow survived on the sphere for hundreds of years, led by a woman named El Huit, who has one of the most interesting costume choices I've ever seen. Then it ramps up again and you're inside an alien shuttle trying to ascend to the top of the structure as your search for Jen continues. The game emphasizes that this is a humongous task and the distance from the bottom to the top is supposed to be hundreds of miles. Considering you're essentially in one location for the entire game, there's also a sense of the level design trying to keep things different so it doesn't feel repetitive. Tommy also changes as a character too, and his motivations naturally shift as he learns new information. Initially, all he wants to do is find Jen and Anisi and get the hell out of there.
I think I found us a way out. Let's go.
But eventually he starts to form a real hatred towards the sphere and its controller, and he becomes pretty dead keen on getting to the top of this thing and fucking up their whole operation.
Fuck your threats.
Since the game takes place over 6 to 8 hours and there's no time skips, this also means that Tommy went from unwilling hero to saving the world in less time than most people spend at work. If only the guy clocked in and out with a time card, we'd have an even better idea of how efficient he is. There's so many great little environments in some of these levels that you'll really only ever see once or twice, and you just know that someone spent days if not weeks putting together this one room that you walk through for all of 10 seconds and you'll never see again for the rest of the game. And I think it really contrasts to the approach that a lot of games have to level design these days. You know what I mean? Like how so many games nowadays you're always just moving through some kind of generic open world jungle, like a desert or a forest. I mean, look, nothing against a recent game like Ghost of Tsushima, but I'd take Prey's handcrafted rooms and environments over those hundreds of square kilometers of Tsushima's photorealistic island any day of the damn week. Some of the portal sequences in this game are still incredible to witness, and there's some really creative moments in the game that just come completely out of left field. And look, I know it sounds a bit cliche to say it, but we just really don't get games like this anymore.
My God.
Right, now playing this thing in 2020, you've got a couple of options. You can play it on the Xbox 360, which is all well and good and probably the easiest way to do it. On the PC, however, it is a bit different.
What are you talking about, Anisi?
Digital copies of the game aren't too hard to come by, but there's word that some of these keys don't even work on Steam. So I'd say your best bet is to pick up an actual copy on eBay or Amazon, patch it to the current version, and just go from there. I mean, all you really need to do is install the latest patch and then it runs at high resolutions without so much as a single hitch, which I think is just another testament to the black magic that is the id Tech 4 engine. Either way though, I'd recommend anyone who hasn't played this thing to do so. It's one of the most unique and enjoyable shooting experiences of all time, and it's aged about as gracefully as Christy Brinkley. Prey's ending is also one of the most notorious endings in any video game, ending on one of the greatest cliffhangers you're ever going to see. Without spoiling anything too major, Tommy is basically given the choice to take over the sphere and control its power for himself. Thankfully though, being a smart chap and not a complete douchebag, he turns it down and destroys it, and eventually his life resumes to normalcy. But then in a post-credits sequence, he's approached by El Huit in a scene that feels very much like the ending of Half-Life, where he's told that otherworldly, powerful beings are now aware of his presence and would like to make use of his talents.
Your actions are well known elsewhere. These beings are very anxious to meet the great Domasi Taudi.
So the game ends as you hop into a portal heading on to bigger and better things. What happened next though is one of the best examples of blue balls in the gaming industry. Now, originally 3D Realms were working on a direct sequel, where Tommy would have to leave the planet after what happened in the first game and continue his exploits somewhere entirely new. After a while of not much happening, again, sounds familiar, it went back into the hands of Human Head Studios and Bethesda, and this is the Prey 2 that most people probably remember and ultimately wanted. This version of Prey 2 was supposed to have you playing as intergalactic bounty hunter Killian Samuels, living on a planet named Exodus and hunting down sleazy aliens for the prices on their heads. This would have been a completely different kind of game, and the footage we got to see was downright impressive. What's also kind of interesting is how a lot of the mechanics they showed off are things that have now become commonplace, especially in shooters. Things like being able to ledge grab, popping into cover and double jumping combined with the open world setting, allowing you to choose how to tackle all of these contracts. It's kinda hard to not have been impressed by the footage they showed off, and there's definitely something awesome about the way the gunplay looks. It looked violent, fast-paced and dynamic, giving the player lots of different ways to take down their targets. Eventually in 2014 though, this thing got canned, much to the dismay of a lot of gamers, myself included. What we ultimately ended up with was Arcane Studios' Prey, which seemed to have nothing to do with the first game aside from just sharing the same name. but it ended up being an awesome System Shock inspired action RPG that people seem to hate on for little more than it sharing the same name. This has and always will confuse me as to why people shit all over Arcane Studios based off the title alone, as if they had any control over it. Aside from it also being a means to secure the IP, the prey in the title referred to the playable character being hunted down by aliens. In this case it was the dangerous Typhons, and overall I thought it was a pretty damn good game. The sad part is that if it had have come out with any other title, it would have received far more recognition and respect. I'd still give my left nut to play the original Prey 2 build they showed off at E3, but ultimately it wasn't to be. Prey's development history and saga is, like I said, as interesting and unique as the game itself. There's very few games from that same time period that have such polished and focused gameplay, and such a well-told story with high production values. It comes from the dying days of a bygone era where games felt like personalised, passionate experiences, worked on by small groups of sweaty, hairy, and talented people. There's a reason why these kind of games still stand the test of time, and that's because passion and talent is something that never dwindles. The story of humanity being attacked by aliens and one man rising up to put a stop to it is timeless. And I always love that trope of the reluctant hero, the kind of protagonist who just wants people to leave him the hell alone, and then ends up stepping up to the plate and in this instance, literally saving the entire world.
Where do you think you are going?
But look, I feel like I've said and spoiled too much at this point, so if you're still here and haven't already gone off to find a copy of this thing, well, all I can say is, what the hell are you waiting for?
Oh, whoa, fucking hell!
At a time now when boomer shooters are all the rage and every man and his dog is a self-confessed expert, there's never been a better time to go back and check out one of 2006's most underappreciated games. And if that's not enough of a sales pitch, well, just remember, it also has butthole doors.
Dangerously sick people.